Because ultimately, you guys, what I want for you is that when you study for the CCRM, when you study for your interview, I want it to make you a stronger student. Like, yeah, CSBA gets you in the school. Like, that's always, obviously, our mission is to get you in because that's what you want. I know that, and I wanted that so bad. But what I then know you need is you need to be a successful student. I want you to graduate. Like, heck yeah. Like, we need to get you through the program. And so inadvertently, a lot of what we teach and what we do for our students, yes, it's to get them into school, but ultimately it's making you a good student, both, mentally and physically, and just your knowledge base, but yet your mental wellness and all of those things. Like, we try to do all those things because we know it takes everything to kind of make a solid student and get you through school so you're not like miserable and stressed all the time, which you're probably going to be anyways. But trust me, if you have a good foundation, you'll be able to breathe a lot more than your fellow classmates who don't, okay? Applying to CRNA School, fact versus fiction. In this episode, I'm going to share 10 things that most candidates do not know when applying to CRNA School. So let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Finnell, and in today's episode, I'm going to reveal 10 things that I find most students do not know when they're applying to CRNA School. And if you stay around to the end, I'm going to make sure I share the 2 things that you can do that don't require you to do more or to know more that will actually help your odds at getting into CRNA School. So make sure you stick around all the way to the end. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future CRNA career guidance. And so for number 1, that I am going to advise you on is that, if you contact a school or if you go to an open house and you get some feedback on your application, right? They give you some recommendations on things to do to help improve. You have to take those recommendations. I think a lot of people think, okay, well, they recommend it, they don't require it. So because it's recommended, I don't have to do it. And while I'm not saying you have to do everything, there's going to be some things you should probably rank in order of importance to do. I do understand there are some of you are under time constraints, right? Maybe you have all these things you would like to do that were recommended, but maybe the time window you have only allows you to pick from that list. And so you are going to have to be able to decipher from the things of recommended things for you to do, what are the things that you can do realistically within your time frame. However, if time is not a constraint in your application process and they give you recommendations, I am going to let you know that I do think that you should do all of the recommendations as much as possible anyways, because they're not recommending for you to do something if they don't truly feel that it's going to put you in a better position to gain acceptance. So many times I hear students come back to me and they either get an interview for the second time and they don't get in, or get a wait list again and they feel defeated. And then when I start digging into it a little bit more and I ask whether they have reached out to these programs, they usually say they do, because they usually take me up on that advice, which if you haven't reached out to your program, you should. Or maybe they're not getting feedback. Sometimes that happens too. Maybe they just say, oh, it's a competitive application cycle. Come back again next year. You're a great candidate. We just didn't have room for you. And, that's great, that they feel that way about you, but it also kind of leaves you with like not knowing exactly where to go next, right? So that's where CRNA School Prep Academy can come into play and really help you. But all that being said, I find a lot of students who get recommendations from their program, but they don't necessarily follow them to the T, right? They do some of the things, but not all of the things. And, I just think that that's just such a huge missed opportunity. If they recommend a certain course, if they recommend that you get more shadow hours or different ICU experience, but you're like, well, but I have ICU experience, but maybe it's not what they prefer, but I'm getting ICU experience, but they recommended that you maybe advance in your ICU career in a different way, and you didn't do that, and you come back next year and you apply and you interview again, they're going to essentially see and keep record of the fact that they gave you this specific advice, but yet you didn't do it. And it's just ultimately not going to show them that you really want this position. And whether that's true or not, I'm not saying that's not true. I know you really want to become a CRNA. You would not be listening to this episode and this podcast if you were not serious about becoming a CRNA. So that is why I'm here to help you in the fact that you have to take their recommendations seriously. I also had a student who was trying to gain readmittance to CRNA school after a poor performance in a certain course. We worked with him for a couple years. He was given real specific advice on a course they wanted to see him take. I forget the exact reason why. It had something to do with him missing the deadline to apply, or maybe, I can't remember. It had something to do with the deadline to apply to take this course, and he just didn't feel like he was going to have his stuff ready in time to do it, so he didn't do it. But he applied, he interviewed, and they were so let down with the fact that he didn't repeat that course that he didn't get into school that year. He was really bummed about it. He even questioned whether he was going to keep going on. But ultimately he's like, you know what? I just didn't do what they asked me to do. So I'm going to do what they asked me to do, and I'm going to come back and try again for the third time. And he did that, and he got in. So, and they were excited to see him back, right? So it just goes to show that, if these schools are willing to give you their time and give you guidance and give you recommendations, just make sure you take them to heart. That's my number one piece of advice that I think a lot of students think, oh, well, they're recommended, they're not required. But you really should take the recommendations seriously if they were to give you that kind of advice. Number two, is to keep in mind that, and I don't know where people get some of these numbers from. I know there's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet. I've fallen guilty to that many times myself. I clearly try to help my students figure this stuff out. So when I'm searching for them, I equally find misadvice. By far, to get the most accurate information, you guys, you have to go to school open houses 100% every single time and time again. For example, how many people apply to this program, right? I've had students reach out to me and say, hey, this school has like 50% odds of getting in, so that's a pretty good odds. I'm going to apply here. And I'm like, there is really no school that has 50% odds of getting in. I've never even heard of that. So obviously more digging, right? And I'm like, this can't be true. And essentially they're going off something they've seen on the internet or something they purchased on the internet that tells them all these stats or whatever you want to call it, but based on like the COA's website. The COA's website, you guys, is not always up to date and not always accurate. Unless you're specifically talking to the program director themselves, the information is not accurate. Or a current student who has gone to an open house, or a student who's gone to an open house who heard it from the program director, that's a legit source. But if you're, essentially finding, someone who is not taking the effort to actually reach out to the programs and talk to current students at the programs, just be careful. Don't apply to a school just because you think you'll have the best odds at getting in this program. Almost all schools, universally, I'll tell you across the board, obviously the stat fluctuates year to year even, not just, like a school's not going to have a 30% acceptance rate every single year. Some years they get more applications than others, and so that acceptance rate is going to fluctuate. So that is also why it's hard to really pinpoint an exact number. No, whatever stat you hear, it's always going to fluctuate year to year. But regardless, after I investigated and put a post out into our community, I had a student and I said, if anyone's going to an open house, please ask this question because I'd like to clear the air on this. I've heard it on more than one, from more than one person for this particular school, that they've heard that there's like 50% acceptance rate or something. Maybe it was even higher than that, like 75%. I'm like, that's just not true. It cannot be true. And it wasn't. After they went to an open house, they asked this question, and sure enough, the school falls more like into the range of 25% acceptance rate, meaning they get 100 applicants to take 25 students. Okay. So the information that they got was not accurate. And if you go to the COA's website and look at this particular school, it said something like how many, like what's the average class size? And I think it said like 16, and how many applicants? 16. So there was like 100% acceptance rate on the COA's website. Again, not accurate. I don't know why those numbers get there sometimes. Sometimes the numbers can be relatively accurate, but other times they're way inaccurate. Like they'll say board passing rate 0%. I'm like, that's clearly not accurate. Like they have someone passing boards. So just take it with a grain of salt. Go to the open houses. That's always the best way. And what I will say as far as applying to schools because you think you have a better chance of acceptance, like not all schools are created equal in that sense. It is 100% true. Some schools are like 10%. Some schools are more like 30, 40. Well, 30% is probably the highest I've ever seen, 30, 35%. If you look at number of applicants to the number of positions available, right? Or spots, cohort seats. I think the highest I've ever seen is about 35% as far as overall acceptance rate. I've never seen anything close to 40 or 50% unless it's a brand new cohort or brand new program. You can get closer to 40% acceptance rate with a brand new program. I know a lot of students will question, oh, well, Jenny, it's brand new. Like, I don't know if I want to go there. I don't know if they're going to have things figured out yet. What if they have a terrible board passing rate? And yes, there's always some risk involved going to a new program. But that being said, they wouldn't be able to open their doors and have you into their program unless they've gone through a pretty grueling process to get approved by our accreditation body, which is what all the other more established schools have to do every 4 to 6 to 8 years. They have to get reaccredited. And so essentially, when a new school opens, you're guaranteed to essentially get through that cohort based on when they're going to be due to be reaccredited again through the accreditation body. So unless their program fails miserably in the first few years, you're more than likely still going to graduate. But that being said, even established CRNA programs can go through staff fluctuations, and which can cause a lot of turmoil with the cohorts themselves. You can have very well-known, very good programs who get new faculty, or have some kind of up amongst arms among the dean of the College of Nursing and the program itself, and all kinds of back and forth, which can cause a lot of disruption to the students, even though it's a well-established program with historically good board passing rates. And then maybe they have a really bad year where it kind of like tips the scale and goes way down because they had a lot of faculty shifting going on. And so that can even happen in a good school, you guys. So taking a risk on a new program is definitely a risk worth taking. I never see a problem with it. Usually what's I think is really kind of exciting about new programs is they're excited, right? This is brand new. The faculty come in there really fresh, really excited, and really just motivated to just connect with you and help you through this process. So at least that's kind of what I see. I see, the newer upstarting programs come in with like a real exciting, vibrant outlook on starting their program. And so I think that really feeds into the overall picture and success of their students. So keep that in mind. Again, I think that's a benefit of a new program, and not to mention, like I said, higher acceptance rate, because the word of mouth has not gotten out there yet. So if you get word of mouth that a program near you is opening, this is your sign. That's your sign to apply. So start working all your stuff now. There's always seems to be programs that are opening up, popping up all across the country. And equally, unfortunately, sometimes there seems to be almost every year at least a program, maybe two, that actually shut down. So make sure you're staying on top of that. And again, the best way to do this, you guys, is by staying on top of going to program open houses. Go every year. From the time you're in high school all the way through to when you apply, go to the program open houses. Know when their next program open house is. That is the best way to kind of stay up to date with all of the changes that the program may be going through, right? Okay, so essentially kind of ballpark numbers, if you want ballpark numbers, other than brand new programs that may have a closer to 40% acceptance rate, maybe even 50%, are typically you have 4 to 6 applicants for every 1 seat. So again, ballpark figure, you're looking at like 20 to 25% across the board as far as blanket of people applying, based on how many seats they have. Now, if a school gets 240 applicants, maybe out of those 240 applicants, 30 of them don't qualify, right? They've missed something. They didn't do something in the requirements, and so they're actually thrown into the pile of not qualified. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, those are probably the students that don't even have the GPA. Some of them maybe, but some of them maybe just don't even meet the requirements as far as maybe they don't even have a chemistry course, and somehow they maybe miss the fact that they need a chemistry course to apply to CRNA school. But otherwise would be a great applicant. I've had so many times where students would otherwise be a great candidate, but they just somehow miss a pretty big part of their application. And a lot of times it comes down to like the course requirements to apply to CRNA school. I recently had someone post in the community, that she had Intro to Chem and Chem 1, but she was essentially rejected because she didn't have Chem 2. She was shocked because she was like, well, I have Intro to Chem and Chem 1. I thought that would satisfy the Chem requirements. In some schools, it does not. Some schools, they want a true Chem 1 and Chem 2. Some schools don't even consider an Intro to Chem a chemistry course at all. It's funny, I have a cousin, she's not going to CRNA, but she's in nursing school. A very reputable BSM program here in town, and that was her experience. She didn't have to do an actual chemistry course. It was like intro to chem, or I don't know what she called it, but it was not a true chem course. She was like, this is so easy. It was like high school chem all over again. And I'm like, well, just so you know, if you go to CRNA school, you're going to have to do you're going to have to do a legit chem course 1 and 2. And she's like, okay. I mean, she's not going to CRNA, but I just it's just interesting, right? And all nursing schools tend to be different as far as what kind of courses they require you to have. Like I had to have an algebra course for my nursing program. I think that's pretty unique. I don't think most nursing schools require you to have any kind of math course, but there are some CRNA programs that require you to have a math course. And so you have to be aware of these types of things when you're going to apply, because unfortunately, if you don't investigate this type of information out early on in your CRNA journey, you could be left with literally no time to do it, right? Because courses take a while to complete. So think about that. But yeah, the typical is, about 25% acceptance across the board if you were just pick a ballpark number. And that's pretty much for all established CRNA programs. The only exception would be relatively new programs for the most part. But again, this one program that's supposed to have 100% acceptance rate or over 50%, in reality it's 25%. So the myth was revealed. So that was number 2, is the fact that the average, or I should say the average ballpark number for acceptance rate is about 25%. Although if you're part of CSBA, it jumps up to 65%. Whoop, whoop. And I have some exciting news I'm going to share in the coming months. It's a little bit, I guess when this episode airs, it's going to be mid-November. So actually CSBA students, you're probably going to know this when this episode comes out, but we're sharing something really exciting, a new program that we are launching come 2023. So if you're a CSBA student, look out for that email. Again, it's a real exciting opportunity for you. And again, overall, our students find a lot of success in getting into CRNA school, way more than just the average acceptance rate. Schools may tell you that students who participate in the interview day have no say in the selection process. And while they don't, technically they can't pick a candidate, right? It still comes down to the admissions panel committee to actually select candidates to be considered for admissions. They do, however, consider the feedback if they were to get feedback on some type of interaction they had with you. What I mean by that, and I know this because I know programs who use this strategy and they tell me about it, so I know it's true. I can't speak for all programs across the board, but I don't know why, other than just being nice and kind of creating more or laid back environment and friendly environment. I would say most schools are probably using students to kind of gauge cohorts, compatibility, by getting some kind of feedback, whether that's good or bad, or nothing, right? From their interaction with the students during the interview day. And essentially what I mean by that is, let's just say, there's a group of 15 students who are coming in for the interview that day. So they have 2 student volunteers and they take you on a tour. They show you a simulation lab. They kind of help answer questions and they're just chit-chatting, just friendly, right? What if they ask a question to a particular person and they get kind of defensive, right? Like, you work in the ER. Oh, I'm surprised you got an interview. You work in the ER. And then what if you took offense to that? And you're like, well, I'm here, aren't I? Like, I got an interview. I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to throw an example out there of maybe an interaction that could be seen as slightly defensive or negative, and maybe that really caught them off guard by how you reacted to their commentary on your ICU experience. And so maybe they were like, wow, that was really defensive, and anyhow, and then so let's just say later on down the road, the faculty say, hey, any insights or feedback you can give on anyone in particular, anyone stand out, anything. And they say, well, so-and-so got defensive when I asked about their ER experience and why they actually didn't have true ICU experience. And then the faculty, depending on how your interview went, could say, oh, that's interesting because we had the same experience in our interview, or we kind of gauged that too. So now, I mean, who knows? I don't know. I'm just, again, throwing out like random potential things. Or vice versa, maybe, they struck up a conversation with someone and, they were, why do you want to become a CRNA? And that you shared your story and it was really personable and you laughed and chatted about it. And then, when the program's asking the students after the fact, they're like, what could you tell me about any of the students you interacted with today? And they say, well, so-and-so, shared these really unique things about her, or kind of showed me some of her personal side, or him or her. I'm using that interchangeably, him, her. and they were really, really friendly and easy to get along with and easy to chat with or whatever. They're like, oh, okay, awesome. We kind of gathered the same thing based on this person's interview. They don't say, yay or nay, but if that student tells them is being reinforced by what they experienced in the interview, it may push them, right? Maybe they already kind of thought this person was slightly defensive, and by asking that student about their interaction during the meet and greet, they could say, okay, yeah, our suspicions were confirmed, okay, versus the other way. And so it's not really like they're the ones making the decisions, that is true, but essentially they can kind of gauge what maybe they're already thinking based on their interview. So just be aware of that when you go in for the meet and greets. I'm not trying to make you more nervous, because you're probably like, oh my gosh, I know I'm going to sweat buckets. I hope that's not the case, but I'm just simply trying to give you a friendly heads up to make sure that you're treating that as almost like an interview in itself. I've also heard some kind of unfortunate experiences where these students are let in for an all-day event and they literally just sit in a room and do nothing while they're like, why is this booked for 6 hours? I've been sitting here for 4 hours doing absolutely nothing, staring at people who are also waiting to interview. So I don't know if all schools have that figured out, as far as like, I don't know if that was done intentionally to see if they can figure out who's going to crack first when they just sit there and wait. It's like watching paint dry. I don't know. I mean, again, I can't speak for all the rationales and reasonings behind the interview process. I would like to think it's thought through, but maybe it's not sometimes. Maybe it just sometimes doesn't work out as convenient or as nice of an experience. I've had other students who were like, yeah, the day I spent kind of touring the facility, it was amazing. They gave us so much information. Essentially, some schools will almost give you like a full-blown open house, right? They're going to give you all kinds of information, which can also kind of lead to a challenge in the interview when they say, what questions do you have for us? Because it kind of almost tests you on how well you were paying attention and what notes you took. Because if you ask a question that was blatantly answered during that like introductory period, they might be like, I know I answered that, So that's why I always encourage my students to kind of think of questions that are a little bit off the beaten path and not the standard, questions that you could ask, and at least have one kind of unique question. And so that way, if they do address it in the open house, you're like, oh, I still got my backup question, right? That I can maybe ask and inquire that's a little more unique. All right. So that was number 3. Number 4 is that all waitlists are numbered. That's kind of a myth. A lot of students think there's a number to a waitlist, and while I'm not saying that some schools may have a numbered waitlist, there are a lot of schools that do not. And even the schools that have a numbered waitlist, it doesn't mean that if you're the number 2 candidate, there could be an exception. They would take you versus number 1. I mean, what if number 1 has, I don't know. What if there's something that comes up and number 1, does something or whatever, or maybe they find out something, like maybe they left the ICU, right? Maybe they had a candidate who's in the number 1 spot in the wait list, but they found out somehow that student no longer works in the ICU, and that was a contingent thing. They had to stay working full-time in the ICU, and so boom, now you're into the number 1 spot. Or maybe even though you're number 2, you're the one following up every month, you're doing extra things, more shadowing opportunities, going to state association conferences and networking and meeting faculty, and they're like, wow, you're on the wait list? Well, I mean, look at this person who's on the wait list number 2, and the number 1 hasn't done a thing. Maybe we'll bump them ahead of number 1. I'm not saying that. I mean, maybe that's happened. I don't know. I can't say. I don't know of that happening, but I would think most humans, if they meet someone who's going above and beyond and they're number 2 on a list and the number 1 person on the list is doing absolutely nothing, I would think human nature would say, well, let's give number 2 a shot. They clearly want it really, really bad. And so I guess my biggest takeaway from this is don't remain still on a wait list. I'm not saying you have to email them every week, so please don't interpret it that way. I have a lot of students who are like, oh my gosh, Jenny, how often should I touch base? I don't want to annoy them. And I get it. But I would say, at least, once every 3 weeks, 4 weeks or so. But don't just say, don't just email and ask them, hey, what's the status, right? Try to email with a little more thought than that and express how you've been educating yourself. Maybe read a current ANA journal and find a article that really strikes with you, and maybe you can, let them know some insight you gathered by either going to a state association meeting or getting another shadow experience, or maybe you retook your GRE and you want to update your score. Show that you're still making movement, because that is really important versus just asking, what's the status? I need a status update. versus saying, hey, I shadowed a CRNA at whatever, hospital. They told me, they asked these really great questions, and I found that experience really valuable, and it makes me more and more excited to become a CRNA, and I'd love to check on the status of the wait list. And so it shows them a little bit like, oh, okay, that's really nice. You've been doing these extra things. It just shows them that your heart is in it, and like, you're wanting this so bad, right? And versus someone who doesn't reach out at all, or who reaches out and just says, hey, can you give me an update? So that's my piece of advice for if you get waitlisted, and you think, well, if I'm number 8, then what's the point of even doing anything else? The thing is, you don't really know. Most I don't know of any schools that tell their students what number, and I think part of the reason is because they probably want some flexibility in that. They don't want it to be super rigid, because they know that this type of thing happens where certain candidates may be bumped ahead of other ones depending on how they express their interest in the program going forward. So again, they don't disclose where you were at on the wait list, and or if they do, I've had students who are like maybe number 10, they still get in, and so it does happen. So just because you think you're far back on the wait list, I mean, if you're on a wait list, you have to take that as, I'm going to CRNA school. Like, it's just a matter of getting that phone call. And while that, you have to let go of it in a sense that you have to keep moving forward. You have to still have a plan of what's next. If I were to have to start all over again and apply somewhere else or apply next year, you equally have to be just as prepared to pick up a phone call and accept that seat. And I've heard stories of students getting a phone call a couple weeks before the cohort starts. I mean, that's a little crazy, but I have heard of it happening. And, but would you say no? I mean, I wouldn't. I'd be like, I quit. I called my boss today. I quit. You don't ever have to rehire me. I'm going to make it through CRNA school, and off I go. And yeah, I mean, I think most people would be willing to drop all their things and try to figure out how to make it work. I can only imagine that would be really stressful though. So hopefully you have more than a few week notice. All right. So that was number 4. Number 5, if you if you give wrong answers in your interview, people a lot of times think they're doomed. I've had so many students who are like, I don't think I did good enough in my interview. I just totally shot my chance. They come out of the interview feeling awful. And I will tell you right now, I didn't come out of any of my interviews feeling like I made it, right? I knew I did better on my second interview, but I still was like, I know I didn't answer where the platelets are made correctly. I said, they were like, Jenny, where are platelets made? It was like rapid fire, right? And I was like, liver. As I said it, I was questioning it, but I didn't have time to and they were like, are you sure? And I was like, yes. And of course they moved on. And I was like, bone marrow, dang it, Jenny. Like after the fact, right? So, I mean, I made mistakes in my interview, and the reality is everyone's going to make some mistakes. It's more about how do you kind of go with it? Does it get you so rattled and shooken up that you can't move forward? I mean, they probably see students who, if they can't find an answer or don't know the answer, they just get stuck, or they're like, I can't give you an answer, or they can't keep moving on, right? So again, don't worry about perfection as much as consider, what would you do if you were proven incorrect? What would you do if you're wrong? What would you do if you don't know? Those are more important than just knowing everything, because they're going to test you until you don't know something. They're going to test your knowledge base and see how far they can take it. If you know something, they're going to go a little bit further. And if you know that, they're going to go a little bit further. And then they're going to see where you get tripped up. And that's where they're going to kind of gauge where you end, and they're going to see how you handle yourself when you don't know. So focus more on that aspect of practicing versus trying to know everything. Because there's just too much. You will never know everything. And if you need to know everything, you need to question yourself why that is. Like, why do you have to know everything? Like, what is so important about knowing everything? Are you afraid that you're going to make a mistake? Are you afraid that you won't have a resource? I mean, get to the root of that. Like, what is so bad about making a mistake? Okay, you don't want to hurt anyone. Well, yeah, that's a pretty big mistake, but most mistakes, you're not actually hurting someone, right? And then how do you prevent that from happening? You use your resources. That's always what you fall back on. If you're ever questioning it, the biggest key to not making a mistake that's harmful, you guys, number 1 is slowing down. That's number 1 thing, is if it's just taking that extra second to double and triple check what you're doing and triple check your math. I don't care. I mean, unless the patient's actively dying in front of you, you can take an extra second and look and confirm your dose, right? and the medication and all that stuff. But so slowing down is really, in my opinion, kind of one of the, and focusing, right? If you're distracted while you're doing something, you're more likely to make a mistake. So focus and slowing down. And then number 2 is just knowing when it's okay to question your knowledge and being okay and accepting of needing to question your knowledge. And so, I think they're looking for things like that too, because again, that makes a safe practitioner, knowing someone is willing to say, I don't know this, I need to figure this out, I need to ask someone before I just guess, right? I'm not going to take a wild goose guess. This is what I do know, but this is where my knowledge is kind of falling off, so how can I get even deeper on this so I can make sure I'm making the right decision? All right, so don't worry about knowing all the right answers, worry more about how you handle yourself in the face of not knowing. That's number 5. Number 8, or I'm sorry, I totally jumped to, because I saved the last 2, so I skipped an order because I was going to save the 2 that I thought were really good for the end, so I jumbled up my numbers here. All right, so number 6 is they will ask different questions every year, and interview to interview. And so I see so many students focus on, oh, they're going to ask me this because so-and-so had this question last year, or even from interview to interview, meaning so-and-so interviewed yesterday, I'm interviewing today, and they told me the questions. You guys, I hate to break it to you if you don't already know this, but they know. Like, they know that you know the questions. Don't get me wrong, schools tend to have favorites, and they tend to ask those almost all the time. You're right. Give or take a few favorite questions, right? But for the most part, they know students talk, and so they do change it up. They do that by bringing in different interview panels from year to year, even from day to day. But they have a huge bank of questions, and so it's not, in my opinion, yes, practice as many questions as you can. I'm not poo-pooing that. But don't get hung up on practicing the exact question. It's more about practicing the style of question and gauging where your weaknesses are within those styles, right? If it's pathophys and pharm, where are you finding that you don't know how to advance your knowledge and speak to certain things in pharmacy or pathophys versus emotional intelligence? Are you having a hard time talking through a difficult time with a coworker, and why is that? Are you getting defensive? Are you darting your eyes across the room? Are you clicking your pen? Focus on things that you can adjust and become more aware of, versus focusing on exactly what they're going to ask you. Because I just feel like 9.9 times out of 10, or maybe 9.5 times out of 10, you're not going to get what you think they're going to ask. And you might get 1 out of 10 questions, I think, that you've prepared for, maybe 2 if you're lucky. But the rest of them are just fair game, right? So again, I see students focus so much on, I have to know what the school asks. And again, it is nice if you have someone to talk to. I always encourage you to find out the style of interview and potential questions that they were asked, because it does give you an indication of the style of question they tend to ask, but I wouldn't count and bank on them asking you the exact same questions. So don't let that knowledge hinder you from practicing more questions, I guess is what I'm getting at. That should not stop you from getting a big picture practice of questions all across the board. Even if you're like, it's only personal questions. I mean, if you 100% know that, like they never sway in their style, okay, cool. Then maybe don't worry about pathophys pharm. Like if you feel okay with that. But I do think at minimum, you should at least know your ACLS drugs by heart. Because I don't know, I just feel like that's such fair game. Like, what if they want to throw you a curveball, right? And maybe they have you tell you a challenging time that you made a clinical mistake, and then they start going into that clinical mistake as far as the pharm behind it, or whatever it ends up being. I don't know. Like, you never really know. So I just don't think you should neglect brushing up on your pharm and pathophys knowledge. I mean, I really think, and then ultimately what you kind of got to look at it as, and I know some of you are like, well, Jenny, I'm on a time crunch. I get that, but I'm hoping you're hearing this podcast in time to where you plan well enough ahead to where you won't find yourself in a time crunch. Because ultimately, you guys, what I want for you is that when you study for the CCRM, when you study for your interview, I want it to make you a stronger student. Like, yeah, CSBA gets you in the school. Like, that's always obviously our mission, is to get you in because that's what you want. I know that, and I wanted that so bad. But what I then know you need is you need to be a successful student. I want you to graduate. Like, heck yeah. Like, we need to get you through the program. And so inadvertently, a lot of what we teach and what we do for our students, yes, it's to get them into school, but ultimately it's making you a good student, both, mentally and physically, and just your knowledge base, but yet your mental wellness and all of those things. Like, we try to do all those things because we know it takes everything to kind of make a solid student and get you through school so you're not like miserable and stressed all the time, which you're probably going to be anyways, but trust me, if you have a good foundation, you'll be able to breathe a lot more than your fellow classmates who don't, okay? So anyways, I'm going off on a tangent now, but back to don't focus on specific questions. Try to just improve your knowledge overall, and that speaks from emotional intelligence, pathophys, pharm, everything. Why you want to be a CRNA, understanding this profession and why you want to be in the profession, understanding different political things that are going on, really kind of all-encompassing, Okay, so the next thing I want to share with you is they will not always ask about your specialty. Now, a lot of times they do, so I can't say that they won't, because most of the time they do. I guess if I had to put a percentage on it, 90% of the time, I would say they're going to ask you about your specific specialty. But there are like these 10% stories I hear where students like, I'm a CV/ICU nurse and they ask me neuro questions. And I'm like, ooh, ouch. So that's kind of goes back to like, don't just like have laser or tunnel vision when you're preparing. Whole picture, right? Whole picture. And so, because they want to see, and that's them testing you, right? Like, did they just focus on CV, on cardiovascular knowledge, or do they have a decent understanding of other knowledge too? So they don't always just pick your specialty. Like if you're a peds nurse, for example, don't just prepare for them to ask you peds questions. You have to prepare for them to ask you adult physiology. They may ask you some peds questions, but they may also equally ask you some adult physiology as well. So you have to make sure that your knowledge, again, is well-rounded, because they could really throw anything at you. All right, so the next one is they may actually ask you questions that you would never, ever in your wildest dreams think you will be asked in a CRNA interview. One of them, my good friend, I've told the story before, so if you've heard it, bear with me, but my girlfriend got asked on her CRNA interview, if you tell me any kind of animal you could be, what would it be and why? And she said she'd be a butterfly because they were pretty and she could fly away. That's what she said. And I crack up. She's a CRNA now. She didn't get into that program, but she's a CRNA now. So happy ending to a funny story. I don't even know. I was not asked that question myself, but I don't even know what I would have said. But it totally will catch you off guard. And they're just looking for why. So you could be pretty and fly away. So maybe that was an indicator that maybe she was a little flighty, or maybe she had a fear of commitment, or maybe she was really shallow because she just cared about beauty. I don't know. Who knows how they interpreted that? I have no idea why they even asked that, but that's all I can think of. But yeah, they could ask you some totally oddball things. I've had a student tell me that they were asked, you're stranded on a frozen lake and all you have is a stick and a piece of string. What do you do? So it's like, so again, they're just trying to see, how are you going to rationalize this tough situation? What are you going to come up with? And it's just kind of gauging your wittiness and kind of thinking on your toes. So sometimes they're asking you questions that are completely what seem like in left field, but it's, again, this emotional intelligence style type of questioning that's really kind of gauging who you are as a person, which is why it's so important to kind of hone in on that prior to your interview. All right, so I've saved the best for last. And these two things that I'm going to share with you are things that if you were to do, they don't require more courses, more money, more effort, more anything. It's just simple decisions. One of them is timing, but, actually both of them are timing. Okay, what I'm going to share with you is, when you are selected to interview, I've had a lot of students are like, oh, Jenny, I have this pick of, they're interviewing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and, I could go Monday, but I can't, or I could go Monday or I could go Wednesday, but I don't know which one to do. Wednesday would give me more time to prepare, so I'm thinking I'm going to go with Wednesday. And I'm always like, go with Monday. Go, and what's an extra 2 days? And the reason why I think a lot of students get trapped in this, oh no, I need a few more days to prepare, is because they weren't preparing all along. If you apply to CRNA school, and actually before you apply to CRNA school, you should be preparing for your interview. Like your interview preparation, it needs to go in line with your overall application. Like you can't neglect your interview prep until literally you've submitted click on your application. And even then, I have students who, even after they submit their application, they're like, oh, I won't get asked. I'm not going to interview. And so they don't prepare. And then they get invited to interview and they're like, Don't let that be you. If I'm speaking to you right now, I'm telling you, please, please promise me that if you are actively applying to CRNA school, that you are taking the interview process really seriously and you're preparing from day one. I'm not saying you have to spend, 3 hours a day studying for the interview from the time that you know you're going to CRNA school, but making a conscious effort to do little things in your daily routine. For me, it was making a notebook in the ICU when I had a patient with a certain disease process or on a certain drip octreotide, whatever it is. I would Wikipedia that drip. I would Wikipedia that disease process, look it up, and I would find out how the mechanism of action works with that drug and how I dose it and why and all the things. Or if I had a question in rounds, I would pick, the fellow's brain about it. So I made that my prep. And it felt really minor because it wasn't like giant chunks of my time. It was just kind of as I worked. But then, intermittently on the weekends, I would study that binder and I would quiz myself and I would have my husband ask me a few questions, right? So I found ways to kind of incorporate interview prep kind of as I went along. And that was a year leading up to CRNA school. I didn't just wait. I probably actively studied for my interview for 9 months prior to my first interview, and I still didn't get in. But then I got into my second one. And so, I can't speak for everyone. Everyone's so different, and sometimes just getting that experience. If I had an opportunity to mock interview, though, back when I was applying, holy cow. I mean, I probably would have gotten in on my first time had I had mock interviews, and it's a huge tool. And for those of you who are maybe not aware, we have now opened up that service to anyone who wants it. It's now on a website called Nurses Teach Nurses. We did kind of move it to a brand new platform that was custom built for our needs because I wanted to be able to better serve you and be able to provide more resources for this type of service. So again, it's on nursesteachnurses.com. You do have to create a free account to view people's availability. So if you go to view their availability, it's going to put you on a loop and it'll kick you back out of the website. We did that to kind of protect who's on the website and who's purchasing the services. We want to make sure that there are real people, that they're not robots on there booking our availability, because that happens. Anyway, so Nurses Teach Nurses, if you are looking for a mock interview, I suggest to do one at least a couple months out from when you anticipate your actual interview. Yeah, a couple months out. This gives you time. Time is your friend. And so I said these last 2 tips are about timing. It's, the reason why this first tip is prepare early and pick the first date is because the interview panel can fatigue. And so when someone says, but I want a few more days to prepare, interview on Monday. They are fresh. You can get in the very first day to interview before they get fatigued and burn out from Monday and Tuesday, right? By Wednesday, what if they're already kind of like, I'm over this? I mean, not really, but really, they are humans, right? They are not robots. They are humans, and it's a lot of work to interview 100 people for a few spots. My friend and colleague, I'm not going to disclose the school, but it's a school in South Carolina. I think he said he got 140 applicants, and they spent about a month, 15 people a day interviewing. So can you imagine a month, 15 people a day, like Monday through Friday? I mean, I cannot imagine. That sounds incredibly exhausting. Maybe not every day. I forget how many days a week they held interviews, but it was almost an entire month of interviews to get through all of They interviewed about 100 people for 36 spots out of 240 applicants. So again, very competitive. But yeah, I mean, if you had a chance to be at the front of the pack to interview towards the front end of that, and they put you in clusters. And so they had the top 30, top 20, top 10, top 7, or I forget, it was like top 10, top 15, top 20, top 30, something like that. He had clusters of people that were like for sure going to get in based on, and they had them kind of ranked in the top 10 again. But they had 36 seats, right? So when they get to the top 30, then they have to say, okay, who are these other 6 seats going to go to? How can we kind of wean through some of these people who are kind of iffy? And so when you interview first, you're more like if you picture it this way, like if there's 36 seats and you're interviewing first, you're interviewing for 36 seats. What if you interview last and they already have their top 10? Those top 10 more than likely are not going to budge. But had you been at the beginning, maybe or maybe not, maybe you would have fallen in the top 10. I'm not saying that they don't consider you for the top 10 if you interview and you knock it out of the park. I mean, you could bump someone from the top 10 into the top 15 or whatever the next rank was. But again, it's a little bit less likely because now you have a lot to compare to. Now you have a lot of, and also like they've seen a lot now. And so again, I just think just go as soon as possible, and don't let this make you feel discouraged if this is not possible for you. If you're like, oh, but Jenny, my school does rolling admissions, and I know I'm not in the first rolling port or session or whatever you want to call it, cohort. It's okay. Just go do the best you can. It doesn't mean that you're doomed, okay? So please don't take this as doomsday. I'm just saying, if you have the choice, go early. Go first thing in the morning. Get your spot early, okay? And go on one of the first days, just to can prevent any human error of fatigue or whatever. I have been told that, sometimes if, say, they come out of a bad interview, maybe the interview kind of didn't go well and it kind of left the interview panel feeling kind of crummy, then they go interview the next person, they're already kind of like not in the best mood. I mean, that kind of stinks to like walk into a room where it's like people are already like, ugh, I got to interview again. I just want to be done, right? Because they had a bad experience. So that stinks. But again, I think they all do the best they can with not letting that bias or whatever affect them in their next interview. But ultimately, again, human nature is human nature, and it is what it is. All right. And then the last one, again, is early applications get preference. Now, not all schools do this, but I will say the vast majority of schools that I have come to know do prefer early applicants. And what I mean by that is, like, if the application cycle opens August 1st and closes August 31st, the student who applies on August 1st versus August 31st are usually two kind of different students. Not always, obviously, because there's always outliers, always people who don't fit the mold, but they know the student who comes in first is like the go-getter, the ones who's like, I've been planning for this, I'm ready, let's do it, versus a person who's like, okay, I waited too late, I'm scrambling, I kind of made up my mind last minute to do this, and I'm going to do it now, and I don't have I'm barely getting in. So it just shows a better planner. It shows someone who has anticipated and who has planned a little bit better. And so ultimately, sometimes they get preference for the first interview spot, like I spoke to, preference for, maybe they're going to fill the first 10 seats with this first round of admissions or a round of interviews. So some schools, again, do these interviews and rolling interviews where they actually fill seats. Not all schools fill the seats. Some schools will wait to the very end and look at everyone as a whole, while other schools actively fill seats. And they don't typically remove people from seats once they fill them. Meaning if there are 36 seats in the first round of interviews, they fill 10 of those seats. Now the next people who go in the interview are interviewing for, 26 seats versus 36 seats. And so that's why I want to stress to you, again, the importance of timing and trying to plan your CRNA progress such that you can get the application. It doesn't have to be on the very first day. Don't get me wrong, but as early as possible in the rolling application process, if that's the case, or as early as possible when they open their window to apply. You definitely don't want to be waiting until the very last day to submit your application. And here is the biggest kicker of where there's two things that people kind of fall off when it comes to meeting the deadline. One is courses, two is references. So put that in the back of your brain. Those are the two things students struggle with the most because they plan a course a little bit late, and then it doesn't finish in time and they hold off their application. If that is you, please reach out to the school. If it's not a requirement, you can apply and then submit the course after it's done, right? Don't delay your application if you've met all the requirements because of an elective course you want to take. Just submit it after the fact. It's worth getting your application in early versus waiting to the very last day and barely missing the deadline when you've had it ready all along. You just wanted to finish that course. Let them know what's going on so they can help you make that decision. If it's a requirement, that's a little bit different story. Then obviously you don't want your application to be thrown out. Again, reach out, let them know. Hey, I have one requirement. It's finishing up right at the wire. Is it okay to still apply? And would you still consider me for interview once I can submit my official transcript? Go from there. The next one is references because students, I say students, but nurses, you guys, sometimes you ask too late, meaning you ask a month before the deadline. And it's like, sometimes you have to, either people miss their emails. I know I'm guilty of it. Heck, I'm sorry. I'm human. And at this point in day, if you don't email support at CRNA School Prep Academy or hello at CRNA School Prep Academy, I have a whole team that manages that. I don't check my private DMs. So again, depending on how you reach out to people, whether, maybe whether or not you actually get a hold of them, right? And maybe you're like, oh, I'm waiting on an email back from them. I'm waiting, but maybe they never got it. So if you're asking for references, ask in person. These are your coworkers. These are people that you should be in connection with. Maybe it's a CRNA you shadowed though. Do you have their cell phone number? All you have is their email? Well, then stay persistent and reach out early, like 3 months before your application's deadline and ask for the reference. So that way you give them a month to do it. Some people need to be kind of stayed on as far as, hey, you know, I still need this reference. Incentivize them a little bit, give them a Starbucks thank you card and say, thank you so much for doing the reference. I really appreciate it. That puts a little bit of jab in their side to say, ooh, I really got to get this done. Like, that's so nice of them to think of me, to give me a Starbucks gift card. I really need to get this reference done, right? And it's just human nature. Again, I'm just speaking to most humans need to be pushed a little bit. I push you guys to, you know, to become CRNAs. I'm like, come on, you can do this. I'm just going to push you a little bit. You equally have to push people that you ask for favors from. So, just keep those two things in mind. That kind of sums up this whole episode. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you so much, and I'm so excited for your future. Keep at it. Keep up the hard work. It will pay off. You know, this is, again, playing the long game. You know, I know it's like you want something to happen right now, this year, and I sure hope it does, but just know that when you're embarking on the journey of becoming a CRNA, you really are taking on the mindset of this is a journey, right? This is a long-standing journey. It's training for a marathon. It's going to take some commitment and time to really get to the end result, which is crossing the finish line. So, and I know you can and you will. So, thank you guys. Until next week, you guys take care. Bye-bye. Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.